Today, we're going to talk about how to avoid amplifying misinformation. So first of all, we'll talk about some trends of how misinformation is spreading and coordinated online, especially a strategy called keyword squatting. So if you're not familiar with the term, not to worry, because we'll show you a case study and then you will know what it means. Also, we're going to take a look at the trumpet of amplification. So how to measure the speed misinformation is traveling online and deciding when to report on it. I'm Mr. Chan, First Draft APAC Bureau Editor, and I'm based in Sydney. So let's talk about some of the recent trends in how a certain bucket of misinformation is promoted and organized online. Sometimes hashtags and phrases can be dominated by a certain group, right? So it's not clear just from the language itself what it means until you investigate further. Here are some examples. First of all, medical freedom. So if you didn't have any context, it's not entirely clear what medical freedom would mean. It could mean a number of things. For example, you may think you're just free to choose whatever kind of medical treatment you prefer, right? But when you look at who uses the hashtag on Twitter and other kinds of social media, it becomes really obvious that a lot of people are using this hashtag. They're against vaccinations or at least skeptical of vaccines. So they're focusing on the word freedom or like medical freedom. Right. And the same with we do not consent. So this was a hashtag that became popular amongst people who are anti-vaccine in the UK. Also the phrase informed consent. So that's another term that seems kind of vague, but it has been adopted by people who are anti-vaccine. One thing that's interesting is the difference between hashtag medical freedom and the phrase medical freedom in quotation marks. So when you search for medical freedom without the hashtag, you actually get a mix of people who are using this as a way to protest the vaccine and also people who support the vaccine. And in comparison, if you search with the same words in the form of hashtags, you actually get more specific results about people saying why we shouldn't get the vaccine. So that's quite interesting. And Data and Society actually has a term describing this tactic called keyword squatting, which is the strategic domination of keywords. So what it means is when people who are basically using a keyword that might be a little bit vague otherwise to push a specific agenda. So like medical freedom, informed consent. So sometimes they also coordinate online using that hashtag. Here's another example, Save the Children. So this started in the US and it became a trending hashtag for people who believe in conspiracy theories about child sex trafficking involving the rich and the powerful, right? However, this hashtag sounds very innocuous, like who doesn't want to save the children? If you don't know the context, you may just think it's like a charity event. So it's not obvious until you look into it and then you realize it's very much connected to people who believe in QAnon. This is another example of how you can dominate a hashtag. So this is the hashtag impeachbidennow. And using the hashtag, a lot of the K-pop fans are posting a lot of materials like photos of the K-pop stars. And what they did was they transformed a hashtag that was originally a right-wing hashtag about impeaching Joe Biden into something that was filled with K-pop content. So they took the hashtag, changed the nature of it, and steered the conversation away from US politics. And let's take a closer look at Save the Children, why it's an important case study and what we can learn from it. And what you can see, when you see something trending, it's very important to investigate the source. Because if you don't understand the origin, you may find yourself amplifying an idea that you didn't even understand fully. So with Save the Children, we did an investigation on where this came from. And while it's impossible to say who first started talking about it, one of the things that we found was that there were many rallies being planned across the US for this one weekend in the lead up to the election last November. So a lot of the Facebook events for the rallies were being organized by this Facebook user, John Dela Cruz. And if you look at their Facebook page, which is public, you can actually see the hashtags that they're using, and a lot of them are related to QAnon, such as this, when we go one, we go all, save the children, or save our children. So with a little bit of investigation, it was pretty obvious that these Save the Children rallies were very much connected to QAnon. And that's definitely something you would want to know before you report on the rallies, right? And we also found examples of people talking about Save the Children on 4chan. So this is a post from August 2020, and you can see some 4chan users promoting the Save the Children or Save Our Children hashtags. So there's a degree of coordination there where some of the users are telling the other people on 4chan to try to use these hashtags to push the idea that there is an international satanic pedophile ring, right? And as you can see, the hashtag Save the Children was not just trending organically. There was at least some sort of coordination behind it. Unfortunately, what happened was a lot of the local news stations in the US reported on the Save the Children rallies without putting them into context. Whether they know, there's a whole story behind it or not, it's not clear. But you can see some of the headlines here. They're just focusing on that there are Save the Children events planned for the Saturday. So to someone who doesn't understand what's going on here, that just sounds like a nice event about protecting our children. So that's exactly the power of keyword spotting. You take a tagline, you dominate it with content related to your agenda, and then you can promote it to people who may not even know what's going on. And this is also an example of what we call the trumpet of amplification. So often what happens is that misinformation starts in niche spaces on the web and then move on to much larger platforms. So it may have started in anonymous web like 4chan, Reddit, 8kun, and then it can move into closed networks like Telegram, WhatsApp groups, and then conspiracy communities. And a lot of these may be in private groups on Facebook or other spaces. And then sometimes it gets shared on social media platforms, the bigger ones like Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, especially Twitter, which is filled with journalists. And so then often what happens is some journalists will see something on social media, it's interesting, and then they would talk about it within their organization. Their organizations may decide to report on it, but by doing so, sometimes they amplify that misinformation to the rest of the world without realizing it, right? And other times, even if they know it's misleading and they try to debunk it, the way they write a headline or frame the story may even be amplifying what's wrong instead of what's right. So even when we're trying to correct the record, we need to be very careful about, the wordings that we choose, and maybe even the timing of publication. So that's something we'll talk about more next time. One of the lessons from amplification is that with trends, you really want to be proceed with caution. So whether you're looking at something that's trending on Twitter or some other kinds of social media, a lot of journalists said that, part of their day-to-day operation is to go on Twitter and see what's trending locally and then pitch that as a story, right? But the problem with that is that trends are not always organic. You can see, with the Save the Children example, it's not difficult to make something trend on Twitter, and you and I can do it anytime. So by jumping onto the latest trend on social, sometimes journalists can unknowingly help advance some of these people's agenda. And good reporting, on the other hand, puts trends into contexts, right? So you're not just stating your observation about a trending hashtag, a rally, but really trying to understand the trend. So you want to explain why it's popular, who may be behind it, and just trying to connect the dots for your readers, right? This is a good example here on how to report on Save the Children. This is from NBC News, and the headline said, QAnon looms behind nationwide rallies and viral Save the Children hashtags. So the thing that's great about this headline is that it doesn't just say, oh, there are going to be a bunch of rallies planned across the US this Saturday. It actually explains the context and who is behind the rallies. On the other hand, amplification can also happen with images, so not just text, right? If you have lots of images of people like cringing when they're getting vaccinated, that is going to build a certain kind of negative narrative about vaccinations. So here's a tweet, this one we're looking at. It shares a picture from the New York Times, this one, and the tweet says, "Dear New York Times photo editor, huge fan here, but when you post a picture of a guy grimacing while getting his vaccine, when the shot actually feels like pinprick, at least consider the fact that thousands may see this as a reason to not get vaccinated, and some will die from that decision." So it can be challenging sometimes with photos because there are usually limited options, and there are only so many ways you can show a vaccination with images, right? But photos such as this one may trigger an emotional response, and in this case, one that is negative about vaccinations. So this example, it's a tweet from the New York Times. So it says, a Boston physician said he developed a severe allergic reaction after receiving Moderna's coronavirus vaccine on Thursday. He self-administered his EpiPen, which is like an injecting device where you deliver the medicine into your body quite quickly. So he recovered quickly. Severe allergic reactions from vaccine remain a rarity, experts said. So this is an article that is reporting on an anecdote about a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine. Now, that is definitely something the public should be aware of. But one of the main problems that we've seen with vaccine reporting is that when news outlets report on anecdotes about adverse reactions, they sometimes forget to put them into context. So even though statistically allergic reactions are rare, meaning the risk is low, they're constantly outsized by amplification because of news reports that highlight, the few cases of allergic reactions, instead of focusing on the majority of people who actually feel completely fine after getting a vaccine. So this is a situation where, sure, you want to inform the public, but you absolutely should also provide a context to help them assess the risks, instead of just, putting the headline out there and then they would then focus on the several cases of allergic reactions without realizing it's actually not that common at all. So this is another example of why images are very powerful in building narrative. So you may sometimes need to use a picture of Bill Gates in your reports, for example, because you're writing about him or debunking some misinformation about him. But you should do so with the understanding that because Bill Gates is one of the most targeted figures in conspiracy theories about a vaccine, so if you use an image of him, you may subconsciously reinforce those conspiracy theories and distract your readers from your report, which could be, comprehensive and perfect in explaining why he's not trying to depopulate the world. Sometimes it can also be quite difficult to confirm the source of misinformation. And adding to that confusion is geopolitical tension. So, for example, we all know that since the 2016 US election, a lot of focus has been on Russian-backed information operations, even when sometimes there is no such operations involved. So here we see Russia Today, a state-run broadcaster. So they're talking about severe reactions to the Pfizer vaccine, which, as we know, is co-developed by Pfizer, an American company, and also BioNTech, which is German. But in fact, RT was referencing something, Western media have already reported on. So the point here is that sometimes we get a little too excited about state-sponsored misinformation campaigns when they may not even be relevant. In this example, RT was not the source of those reports about adverse reactions to the Pfizer vaccine. However, that is not to say that vaccine nationalism does not exist. It is a narrative that has its impact on the information landscape since the beginning of the pandemic. We've seen it every day. So when it comes to reporting on vaccines, some countries are more active than the other in trying to promote their own vaccine development, technology, as well as the idea that their pandemic response is better than the others, maybe the best, right? But it's just that we have to be very careful when it comes to attribution and not jump to conclusion when we're talking about state media, especially. In this last session, we'll talk about how to decide when to use your platform. So like when to report on something. Sometimes misinformation is out there, like here, but it doesn't have any engagement. So no one is sharing it, no one's talking about it. And then sometimes it goes viral and everybody talks about it online. And the tipping point is what we're talking about. It's that sweet spot right before something becomes viral. So when you have a chance to report on misinformation and correct the record before everybody sees it. So that would be what we're trying to achieve. Also, another thing is we're not trying not to amplify something that has no engagement. So like when we're here, because you don't want to give it a wider platform, right? So we're aiming at somewhere around here, which is talking about, the timing is key. And we should also consider public interest versus potential amplification. So when you're debunking misinformation, of course, that's in the public interest and you should do so. But you really want to think about the need to debunk something with the possibility that you're potentially amplifying it. So for example, if it hasn't traveled wide online and, very low engagement, and it may not really be that much of a danger to the community, you may not want to address it just yet, right? So keep monitoring it, see how it evolves before you make a decision. Also, how do we measure how far misinformation has spread online? So if we're using how something has traveled online as a factor in deciding whether we should address it, then we need some ways to measure that engagement, right? I mean, there's no science to this. Measuring engagement on the internet is very difficult, but there are different things you can look at. For example, is it moving from one platform to another? Also, are other journalists and publishers writing about it? Did some influencer share it? And in terms of numbers, how much engagement is it getting? How many people liked it, shared it, especially sharing across different platforms? Also, the one last thing is it moving from one community to another? So even if a piece of misinformation is not getting thousands of shares, it may still be worth looking into if it's being shared across different platforms, across different communities, sometimes maybe in different languages. And one of the tools that can help measure spread is CrowdTangle Link Checker. So it checks whether an URL has been shared on social media platforms. So this is a free little plugin that you can download. And when you click on it, it will show you how much engagement the page has gotten. And then it will show you who has shared it. So these metrics may help you decide whether to cover something or not. Also, one more thing is it's worth thinking about your audience, where they congregate online, what kind of misinformation they tend to share. So here we have an example from a Telegram group in Spanish. And this is a trend that we've seen quite a lot during the pandemic, when people use data from the CDC to illustrate their points. But the trouble is they're taking data from this system called Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is something where anyone can report an event to. So, if you feel a little uncomfortable after getting vaccinated, you can write something there. And all this information is not verified. So we can't use that data in a meaningful way, So, but what we've seen is that data is often taken out of context when people use it as a piece of evidence or thinking it's some sort of credible sources to make claims about the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. So this Telegram post has been seen by more than 7,000 people. And the thing is, though, this is quite a lot, but we don't know how many people have shared it before and after. And that's one of the issues with monitoring closed online spaces, because it's difficult to determine the tipping point.